We are blessed with no rain, we love it. Today is to honor LaVoy and to stand for the Hammonds. LaVoy was murdered when he came to stand for the Hammonds and the injustice being done to our rancher. And partway through a program, we're going to hear LaVoy's words and how he was mad about what was happening to the Hammonds. So we'll hear that a little bit later. Right now, we'd like to start out with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is a song that was written for LaVoy by a patriot.
Another one of the people with the chairperson said
a couple of housekeeping things just before we get started. Dory has been prevented from live streaming, so if any of you out there have yours, okay, Jennifer's doing it? Okay, anybody that can do a live stream, please do so because we want to share this. Okay, anybody that can do it, the more we have is the better. A couple of housekeeping things. Up here on the table, we have pins. Justice for LaVoy, and Free the Hammonds. And we also have some poems, which I'm going to read you, that our dear Paula Hart has written, and Paula Hart also made all of these pins and sent them here. We just asked her to make a nice donation because the funds are going to be split between Susie Hammond and Shawna Cox, who is one of our speakers today, for the lawsuit that she filed yesterday against the federal government. We also have two petitions up here. One of them is Shawna's petition. She's going to read that to you in a little bit. The other one is from Soper, Oregon's for immigration reform, and it's to make our law enforcement officers enforce federal immigration law, which of course right now, the governor said no, you can't. So this is to put it on the ballot so that they have to enforce the immigration law. So both those petitions are up here for you to sign. I'm going to try and get through this without crying, but I'm not going to guarantee that's going to happen. This is a tribute to LaVoy that Paula wrote after he was killed 2 years ago. The first time I heard of you was when I saw you on TV. Something in your tone of voice just captivated me. You spoke about injustice, about freedoms and liberties. You spoke about our country, the way that things should be. There was something about you that naturally drew people in. Maybe because you offered hope for our country once again. The government also saw this, that people were starting to stand, and they knew that they had to stop you, sadly, with a heavy hand. They planned and they plotted and set everything in motion, as you prepared to teach more people without the slightest notion. They set up an illegal roadblock at the end of a blind curve. They ran out and shot you. That's when you chose to swerve. In hopes of saving the others, you jumped out, hands in the air. For what was about to happen, there was no way to prepare. The nation watched in horror as bullets hit you one by one, in complete and utter shock at what our government had done. Not one of them tried to help you. None went to your aid. To them it was just a job, dead or alive, they would get paid. Seeing them all around you with not a worry or a care, so proud of their actions was more than we could bear. The level of fury and disgust only continued to grow as we watched you lay dying out in the ice and snow. They were sure they had silenced you, but what they didn't know is that because of what they'd done to you, is only our voice would grow. Out of this tragedy, even as we began to mourn, a miracle was occurring and new patriots were born. Just know that your sacrifice hasn't been for naught. We will carry on your message until everyone is taught. And copies of this poem are available up here at Palace. And wonderful donors stepped forward and paid for some copies of these so that they could come here today for you guys to have.
Hope this doesn't happen.
His experiences over at Malheur with everything that was going on when they were standing for the Hamlins.
Hard to follow after a poem like that. My name is Sam Hill, and I would like to thank the Patriots that have come out today. You guys are beautiful people. I'm out here because I want to project that LaVoy was murdered. Anytime you take an action that leads a person down a path where there is no alternative but they get shot, that is murder. It should be investigated as such, because until it is investigated and his death, what led to his death is brought to light and brought to justice, there will be no justice. I do not believe that that man should have been killed alongside that road. There was no reason for that. From the start of what happened at the refuge, there was a lack of communication. And that lack of communication led to actions where one man's life was taken. That is not justice. I believe that there was a conspiracy, and I also believe that there was a list of people that they wanted to get. A list of people that are resisting actions that are unconstitutional. There are a lot of people in government and a lot of people out in public that do not understand the Constitution. It's time to start reading and start understanding principles of liberty. We need to understand what life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all means. LaVoy Finicum was robbed of that. We also have the Hammonds that are sitting in jail. They're sitting in jail for way too long. A judge called their punishment cruel and unusual, and he reduced their sentence, and he should have been stuck with, instead of them going to jail, getting out, and then being resentenced. As Americans, as patriots, we're not going to stop until justice is served. We're going to continue to press on and press forward so that LaVoy gets his justice, and so that the Hammonds can see a timely, well, there's no timely release, so that they can be released and go back home to their family. They've done their time. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much for coming out today.
Thanks, Sam. Also, for if you guys, how many have heard that Jeanette filed her lawsuit? She filed it at 12:03 yesterday morning on the anniversary of his death, which I thought was very fitting. So that was awesome. And now our very special guest, who has come all the way from Las Vegas, and who knew LaVoy very, very well, and has been involved in this land fight for decades, Mrs. Shawna Cox.
Thank you. I have been asked to speak to you about a man I knew very well, and I loved him. His name is LaVoy Finicum. Today, on January 27th, is his birthday. He's a cowboy who took a stand. We are here to honor him because he had the courage to stand for something that he believed in. I knew LaVoy mostly because I grew up knowing his family. His grandmother, his aunts, his uncles, and his parents. People that are the salt of the earth. They're hardworking, patient, and enduring their hardships. His grandmother was left a widow with 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls. LaVoy's mother is the oldest of those children. The boys were varied in personalities. but were very independent. I commented to LaVoy one day how he reminded me of his Uncle Jack. Very intelligent, very stubborn, in that you cannot change their mind once it's been made up, but always willing to help and do the right thing. They love and sacrifice for their neighbors and anyone they see in need of help. You can tell when they are taught right from wrong by their mothers. LaVoy was hard-working. I can say without a doubt, he believed in being honest, true, chaste, benevolent, virtuous, and doing good to all men. LaVoy was the first cowboy who showed up at the Bundy Ranch with his horse and trailer by himself in the early morning on April the 12th in 2014 near Bunkerville, Nevada. He rode in the parade with all the horses as they planted the American flag on the Bunkerville Hill. We were all thrilled as we watched that event take place with tears in our eyes. It was a symbol of freedom on the land that morning. He was there as the cowboys stopped along the trail to kneel and pray for safety on their ride down to meet other friends and neighbors under the bridge. I met him under the bridge. He was there to help herd Bundy cattle back down the wash to the Bundy Ranch. He witnessed the armed agents who were set up to shoot the people and were stacking in a military formation. LaVoy was a true student of the Constitution. He took the time to study and truly understand its meaning. He believed Cliven Bundy and saw what had happened to the ranchers because of the BLM. He studied constantly and even started making videos, which many of you have probably seen. He was in the process of writing a book called By Blood and Suffering. How many of you have read that book? It was June of 2014 when I wrote my book called The Last Rancher Standing, the event that took place in Bunkerville. It was published by November of 2014, and I began to market it by speaking in events with Cliven. LaVoy finished his book about February, and I shared information with them about getting it printed. He and Jeanette were busy in promoting their book and were gracious enough to include me in some of their venues. We learned from each other. Sometime in June 2015, LaVoy invited a number of ranchers and a county commissioner, along with Clive and Ryan and I, to a meeting at his home to discuss the Constitution. We had a presentation we had learned and believed was very true. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, in November in 2015, LaVoy called me on the way to Blanding, Utah, to help Commissioner Phil Lyman to stand against the federal government in claiming back the county land that had been locked up for years in unconstitutional wilderness study areas. We offered our support and protection. The commissioner was afraid of the guns that controlled us and went like a lamb to the slaughter. Learning of the Hammonds' plight in Burns, Oregon, he willfully joined in with Ryan Bundy to travel to Burns and march in a protest rally for them. Little did he know that he would end up at the Malheur and take a hard stand. But after arriving there, he too realized that if we don't stand and stand strong, nothing would change. People would go back to their homes and jobs, and the Hammonds would go to the prison for the second time. We needed the media and the attention of the world. Our redress of grievance afforded us in the First Amendment of the Constitution had already been ignored over and over. The petitions meant nothing. So what was there left to do? LaVoy became one of the spokesmen to the media, for the media. He understood why we had to take the hard stand and expose the truth. He was a student of the Constitution and a great orator. The name LaVoy itself is the voice. On January the 7th in 2016, this was a press release by LaVoy. He went to the top of the Malheur, and I recall that day, as I stood with him and he delivered this message. Our message is being distorted and mischaracterized, he said. Reports in the media have tried to portray myself, others as gun-toting militants with a death wish. Nothing could be further from the truth. I have no death wish. The truth is that we are husbands, fathers, grandmothers, grandfathers, productive members of society. I have been ranching my whole life. My family has been working to produce meat for this nation for over 100 years. I simply love liberty and freedom. Because of our concerns about how we and our objectives have been portrayed, we won't be saying anything else about our objectives and message until, well, when it will be our intention to have an expanded press conference to clarify and focus on what this is all about. In the meantime, we want to clarify that we share any and all concerns about safety for everyone involved, including ourselves, our families, the public, and law enforcement officers. All lives are important to us. Ultimately, we want everyone involved to be able to return safely to their homes and families. Our concern about safety is one of the reasons why we chose this remote location. The only reason there are any arms or security here is because we are concerned about our own safety. It is unfortunate that we need to rely on our Second Amendment rights to exercise our First Amendment rights. This is and always has been intended to be a peaceful protest and occupation of our public lands. It's our version of Occupy Wall Street. Although this has been characterized as a federal building, it is public land. We are part of the public. The entrance sign to the facility says, "Welcome to your National Wildlife Refuge." We take that seriously. We believe we have a right to be here for peaceful purposes, but we believe we are entitled to be safe, and we know that we are the only ones who can guarantee our own safety. We won't have any more to say until tomorrow. At the Harney County Resource Center, renamed from the Malheur Wildlife Refuge, we were teaching a simple presentation of the Constitution, the same presentation that was to be presented that fateful day in John Day. That is the virus that the Governor Kate Brown was referring to. It was the Constitution. If we have time today, and maybe we don't, but later on I would like to give you that same presentation that we were giving to the ranchers. You decide, then you can decide if it's truth or not. You have to learn for yourselves. If not, we will have, we'll put it online so you can look at it. After we have now gotten most of the men out of jail. If you want to learn about the crimes of the powers that be, go to, this is important, and write it down if you can remember. We the People Common Law grandjury.com, and there you will find the crimes and the people that are being charged with these crimes on the American people. I have witnessed many miracles from God in this stand that we have taken. I know that we must stand for God, who is the author of truth and justice. We love him, we honor him, and this is why LaVoy took a stand to defend his friends and neighbors. He took a stand against the Bureau of Land Management Agency, who was managing the ranchers, the miners, and others out of business. He stood for truth. He stood for justice. He stood for his God-given natural rights. He stood for my rights. He stood for yours. Today we must stand together and never forget. We must put aside our differences and join together in love. Every one of you are important and has something to contribute. Many of you have asked, what can I do? I have come up with 3 things. Pray. Everyone can pray. It costs nothing to pray. 2, show up to these functions, to the rallies, to the events, to the court hearings. It's important that people know that there are people because we know that the power is in the people. 3, send money. There are many court proceedings that cost us as we are still moving forward to right these wrongs. The Hammonds have their battle, the Patriots have their battle. We're continuing to move forward in these. Yesterday, the other 4 of us that were inside that vehicle filed our lawsuit, whatever it is. Remember this, it isn't about money. It's about justice. It's about getting them right, to expose the evils that have been thrust upon us. And it isn't just us, because we see so many people that are in these prisons that are there because they're victimless crimes. That's against the Constitution. The Constitution states that you shall do no harm. That's the law. Otherwise, we should be able to be free to come and go and do as we want to. All the statutes and ordinances and all these things that they've created to feather their nests is not constitutional. We have to help our fellow men who have been incarcerated and been entrapped to be free. And we see these atrocities more and more, and the longer we've been in jail, the more we see. I want to thank Carol and Dory for inviting me to speak today, for the thing about the things that I love, and for putting this all together. Remember this: united we stand, divided we fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Shawna. It was really a treat. She got here yesterday morning, and Dory picked her up at the airport and brought her up to my place. We live up by Soper Park. And we just had a wonderful afternoon visiting and her sharing things with us that not all of us got to know. You know, we've heard stories, but we haven't heard it directly from Shawna. So being able to just sit down with her and kind of pick her brain and things that happened and her experiences in jail, boy, that's a good one. Yeah, you got to hear that one sometime. That was unreal. Especially the food. Okay. We're going to now play, we only have the video part because we know it's very difficult to see a video. I'm sorry, we have the audio part. It's very difficult to see a video in daytime. So the guys are going to play it, and this is by LaVoy, and it's basically why he came to Oregon to stand for the Hammonds, and this is just an awesome speech, so enjoy. I love the part where he says he'd rather use stronger words, but his wife and kids might be watching later. Yeah. Prophetic poem, and I see Lee's got down, but it matters how you stand. And I'm not going to get this quote quite right, but I know it said there's some things that are worth more than freedom, and your life is one of them. I think that's pretty accurate to what he said. And as it happened, he gave his life for that. So that was just kind of taking us right in, because now we're also honoring the Hammonds for the sacrifice that they're also making. And it's, you know, these poor guys have gone to prison now for a second time, and it's still a long time before they're scheduled to get out. So now we're going to have BJ Soper, who knows the Hammonds and is going to share a few words with us about things that have happened over there.
You know, every time we come to Salem, it's for a rally, it's rainy and it's windy and it's miserable outside. And it was that way last night, and I was worried we weren't going to make it here, and it was going to be another downpour. But it looks like the skies have opened up, and hopefully that's through a little divine intervention so that we could be here today. So thank you for traveling and taking the time to be out here to remember LaVoy, his family, his stand, the Hammond family, and every other family that has gone through these battles and these fights and the abuses. The Hammond family. I first got to meet the Hammond family, Dwight and Susie, in their home. 2016, I guess it was December 2015. They opened their doors to about 12 of us, and we sat in their small home inside of Burns, Oregon, and we offered an ear. And we stood there and we listened to the plight of 70 and 80-year-old people tell us about the stories of abuse and the life that they've had to live for the past couple of decades. And let me tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Watching these two perfect strangers basically cry and tell us how their lives and how hard it's been and how much struggle it's been for them because something as simple as cattle, something as simple as raising food. It was very heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. They had already spent time in prison at this point, and they were being forced to go back to prison. Forced to go back to prison for a second time for in essence, burning grass. In essence, burning lawn or sagebrush. I think the judge classified it as $100 worth of sagebrush. So they're spending 5 years in prison for $100 worth of sagebrush. Anyhow, it's more than just that. It's the injustice of the whole situation. The fact that our government, the people that are supposed to work for us, the people that we've elected, can institute laws and regulations designed for terrorists, for people who blow up buildings in Oklahoma, to send 2 ranching families in Oregon, 2 ranchers that have been ranching for generations, to prison for 5 years for burning grass. That's not justice. That's not anything. That's not American value. That's not anything that our founders fought, bled, and died for in the creation of this country. It's the exact opposite. It's exactly what they fought and bled and died for, to get away from. That's what the King of England did to the founders, it did to their families, it did to all of the 13 colonies. So it's really frustrating, and it's hard to know that those 2 men, good men, one almost 80 years old, or may have turned 80 years old now, another in his 40s with children at home, waiting for him to return home for burning grass. And when I look out, I see a lot of disgust on our faces. I see a lot of anger, and there's still a lot of anger inside of me because what took place out in Burns 2 years ago has changed not only my life, but many of yours as well too. We saw our government in action. We saw our government murder a good man. We saw the government take the word away of a good man because he was rallying people like us. He was reaching us, and they were all reaching the public, and the public was starting to listen and show and understand. And that was put to an end by our government. So when we stand here today, we all say that's wrong. We all know it's wrong. We all read the Constitution, we look at the words that are written, we say, how can they do that? It's not in the Constitution. That's not what the Constitution says. Well, I'm going to tell you how they do that. And it's real simple. It's because we allow it. That's exactly why and how they do it, is because we allow it. And that's where the fight, our fight and our anger and the energy that we all have for this fight needs to change. And we need to put that energy into the abilities to restrict the government back to their box, putting them back inside their box. I was speaking with Ken Medenbach over here about the Supreme Court ruling that the government uses to justify owning and managing lands. Well, wouldn't that be a great place to put our fight and go and say, hey, the Constitution doesn't say you can do this. The Supreme Court may have said it, but that doesn't make it right. And this is where our fight needs to be. Our fight needs to be taking the powers that they claim away and putting it back in our hands. Putting it back where it belongs, back with us, the people, we the people. Those are the fights that we need to be having. Ken fights over oaths of office. Not because it's wrong or because it's not in the court, it's not in the Constitution. It's not their authority to have 2 oaths of office. Their authority is to have 1. And to support the Constitution fully, not to interpret the Constitution. That's our job. Our job is to elect people into office to enforce the Constitution. And if we want it changed, we have a process for that. But until that process happens, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It's the rule of this land, and it's the foundation. So I don't want to spend a lot of time up here today, and yesterday was a really difficult day. A lot of us put a lot of blood and sweat and energy into burns, and we spent time with the guys at the refuge, standing inside the city limits, trying to make sure that blood and battles didn't take place. And to some extent we succeeded, in one major extent we failed miserably, and that weighs on my heart very heavy, and it always will, because the loss of LaVoy is a loss to all of us. But the one great thing about what LaVoy has done is he's put a message inside of all of us. He's put a message out to the world, and as I look across this, I don't know how many people out here have either a LaVoy flag or a LaVoy shirt or some sense of LaVoy on his body, or on their body. And there's a handful of us. His message lives on. His message is strong. His message is to, and always was, to support and defend the Hammonds, which is another battle that we still need to ensue. This battle won't be over until the government is back in its place. The Hammonds are home, hugging their children and their families, and families like the Bundys are restored back to their homes as well too. These battles are big, the abuses are strong, and the only way that we are going to change that is if we look in the mirror, understand that we've allowed it to happen, and the only way it's going to be fixed is when we, the people, stand up and do something about it. Thank you.
I don't know about you guys, but you know, I've always kind of considered myself a patriot. And I'd been to rallies before about the Second Amendment and our right to carry guns and all of that. I watched as we won at Bunkerville, and the feds left, and the Bundys got to go home with their cattle. And then Malheur happened, and the day LaVoy was killed, BJ's right, that was a really tough day. And I just remember sitting there watching the TV, and that was the day I said, that's it, I've got to do more. And since then, I've lost track of the number of rallies and things that we've done. But LaVoy has become a rallying cry. They made a big mistake because they woke a lot of patriots up when they killed him, that we might still be kind of complacent and still doing our Second Amendment things, but we wouldn't be out here probably standing as strong for the Constitution. So they made a huge mistake when they did that, because it woke a lot of people up, and Paula said that in her poem. I mean, that for me, that was my wake-up call 2 years ago. The next speaker, I first heard about him when I heard that there was this guy in Burns that was so upset with what the FBI was doing and how they were playing their little games and going around town and terrorizing people, pretending to be patriots. And he was so mad about it, he says, I quit. I'm not doing my job anymore. What you guys are doing is dishonest. And I went, wow, that guy's he's a man of principle. And he's here to speak to us today. Chris Bryles from Burns, Oregon.
Well, thank you for that. You can all count. I got 2 arms, I got 2 legs. I'm no different than anybody else. I just happen to be a guy that got a little upset with the difference between right and wrong. We all know the difference between right and wrong. I don't care what religion you are, I don't care who you are. If you have a conscious, functioning mind, you can tell what's right and what was wrong. And what was going on in Harney County was wrong. Not that Ammon Bundy came, that wasn't wrong. He brought that to worldwide attention. I don't know how many people know that, but it's worldwide attention. I had a guy that used to live in Burns that was he's a professor in China, and he emailed me and he said, hey Chris, what the hell's going on? I just saw you on TV. And it really caught me. I had another guy from Holland said he heard me on a radio show. That's pretty profound. Ammon Bundy and LaVoy and Ryan Payne and Ryan Bundy and all of the people that came in support of the Hammonds brought it to worldwide attention. I didn't agree with it to begin with because I just didn't understand it. I was nominated as the second person on the Committee of Safety, and I didn't even know what one was. But I felt, you know, I got some responsibility here. The people in this community have nominated me, so I'm going to do my best. Well, I'm trying to do my best, and I never know what it is. But I will tell you that the Hammonds were mistreated. And it's been going on for a long time. And there's all kinds of stories about the travesties that they have endured. If you just imagine that you're living on an island and there's sharks all around you, that's kind of the way they were. Their ranch is surrounded by BLM and refuge. I'm not going to say by government ground. I'm not going to say by BLM land. BLM stands for Bureau of Land Management. Those are our grounds. Those are public grounds, not the federal government's. Read your Constitution. The government can't own more than 10 square miles. And if somebody wants to argue about that and say, oh yeah, because they've changed the Constitution down through the years, I want to see it in writing. It's not there. Just like BJ said, we've allowed this to occur. And if we don't stand up and be heard, it's just going to keep going on. If you do nothing, nothing gets done. Nothing gets done. The Hammonds having to go back to prison for the second time, you know, the judge said it would shock the conscience to fine them for, 5 years for what they did. They didn't hurt anything. I was the Harney County fire chief for a long time. I started in 1984. I quit 2 years ago. I want to say I did not quit the people in my county. I quit the dishonest government in our county. And if I didn't live there, I would not have believed the things that I saw with my own eyes. For people to come in by the hundreds to our little community to spread fear and hatred by our own government. I talked about right and wrong. That's not right. That's wrong. That's wrong. Here we are in the United States of America, and if the federal government wanted to come in and say some things, they should have said the truth and not lied and not tried to scare people and pit people against each other's. United we stand, divided we fall. They came in to divide us. And they did a pretty good job of it. But like any wound, I hope that it will heal. But it's never going to heal without the scars. The scars of LaVoy. What a wonderful man. What a wonderful man. I was at their memorial yesterday. I've been up there several times. I was involved the day that all the Patriots showed up, and we put a flag every quarter of a mile all the way up to the kill site, all the way to the murder site. And somebody came in and they yanked them all down right behind us. Think about that. What an infuriating thing. We're trying to do a memorial to a great man, and somebody comes along and takes it. What kind of hatred and evil would allow somebody to do something like that? Lack of knowledge? I don't know. His memorial has been desecrated multiple times. It's been torn down twice and publicly admitted by one of the sheriff deputies with the condolences, with "it's okay, it's just trash," from Sheriff Dave Ward. Okay, right or wrong? That's wrong. That's wrong. We were up there yesterday. We were putting more crosses up because a memorial is there so that you remember. I was talking to ODOT right after it happened, and I said, I want to put a permanent memorial up there. I want a historical landmark there. And the guy I was talking to was saying, yeah. And as I started through that process, all of a sudden, sorry, we can't do that. Sorry, that's not going to happen. And then they wouldn't return my calls. Is that right or is that wrong? That's wrong. That's wrong. Should the man be remembered? Yes. Is he deserving of being remembered? Yes. Does his family deserve some answers? I'd say yes. That memorial has been torn down. It's been burned. It's been messed with so many times. We just have a small amount of people in Harney County, a little over 10,000 square miles, and there's 7,000 people living there, and about 60-some% of them are federal employees. And so it's the people that's left that have been putting the memorial back up, and when people go back through, if you have a chance to go through there, near milepost 51 on Highway 395C, stop and think about it. Stop and think about what a man did. You know, how many people know that they didn't find a gun on him for 6-8 hours? You know, you just killed a man. Wouldn't you be worried about the gun? Oh, we'll go find it in a few hours. Yeah, how did they find it? He exited that vehicle to save Shawna and Victoria and the other people. I mean, it's obvious. How many people have saw that mucked up video that the government supplied? How many people know that from the satellites they can find out what day the nickel was made laying on the ground? And they couldn't give us detail. Think about that. Why? Why would they not give us the detail? They don't want you to know. They don't want you to know. They want to leave a little speculation in there. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Of all of those crosses that we put from the refuge all the way to the kill site, there is one of those crosses still up. There is one that I built and I put it up, and it's still there. And I personally crawled up cliffs, embankments, all over the place where I thought, you know, I don't get scared, but I was thinking, what the heck am I doing up here? But I thought, well, if somebody's going to tear it down, they're going to have to put themselves in harm's way, and they're going to think about it a little bit. And I did that. Right on, cowboy. Right on.
These are from a memorial.
Those are awesome, awesome signs to commemorate an awesome man and a good purpose. He came to help Ammon and the rest to get the Bundys, or to get the Hammonds out of prison. The Hammonds, they're not bad people, they're good people. All the years that I was there as a county chief, Steve Hammond probably called me more than any other rancher ever. He'd call me and he'd say, Chris, I got a field, I'm gonna have to replant it, and I know it's awful dry out there. What can I do? And I'd say, all right, Steve, what do you know? And I'd talk with him. He'd put the provisions in place, and he would do things the way he was supposed to. You know, they burned less than 150 acres of sagebrush, and what's the best thing you can do for sagebrush is burn it. It's an invasive species. It brings back grass. They didn't hurt anything. They put it out themselves. BJ said they had a big fine. Anybody know how much it was? $400,000. $400,000 for burning $100 worth of sagebrush. Is that right or is that wrong? That's wrong. Absolutely wrong. Before they went to prison, they had to sign an agreement with the BLM that if they ever sold their ranch, they had to sell it to them. They had to sell it to the BLM if they didn't get their fines paid. But they did get their fines paid. But how can the federal government force you to sell them land when their own constitution says they can't have over 10 square miles? How does this happen? Just like BJ said, we did it. We've allowed it. When I went to high school, I got good grades. I'm not an idiot, but I'm kind of a rogue. But I studied the Constitution, got a good grade, so I'd go off and play baseball, because I loved playing baseball. I should have remembered it. I should have followed it. I should have made my neighbor and everybody else aware of it. I should make my sheriff stand up for it. I don't want to say it's my sheriff. The sheriff in our county. You know, I could go on forever. You know, one day is not enough to tell you all the stories from Burns. It's not. How many places have you ever heard of where they took the courthouse and the sheriff's department and surrounded it with concrete barriers and chain link fence? What's that all about? Our own streets. I called City Hall and I said, what the heck's going on? Why are they? Well, because they asked. Okay, we got a lot of deer in town. I want to put a fence up and block my street because these deer are dangerous. And they didn't want to do that. You know, they said there was an armed standoff in Harney County. It wasn't at the refuge. It was at our own sheriff's department, our own county courthouse. People with automatic weapons. I've been there since 1978, and I went up when I discovered the FBI. I went up there to talk to the sheriff's department, and I was met with an automatic weapon in my face and told that he wouldn't talk to me. I said, can you get a message to him? No, you're not going to get a message to him. You're not going to talk to him. Dial 911. Is that right, or that's right? That's not right. What's your sheriff supposed to be hiding for? Why? There's so many whys. It's ridiculous. Jeanette Finicum, bless your heart. And good for you to go on with this battle. I'm kind of a weirdo. Ask anybody that knows me. But I went on Facebook yesterday and I said, hey, Stephen E. Grasty, former judge of Harney County, I do hereby challenge you to the cage match that never did occur. I challenged him to one before, and I said that we will sell closed circuit TV and tickets, and all the proceeds that go to Jeanette Finicum's legal fund. I haven't got an answer back, but I think the thought is there. I don't know, does anybody have any specific questions from me? I never prepare a speech. I try to say what's in my heart. You can't remember lies, so I just speak the truth. When are we going to march on D.C.? As soon as I get some new shoes. Unless I can get my very good friend Todd Applegate to drive me to Washington, D.C. He's been calling me Miss Daisy. But if we do nothing, nothing gets done. If it's right, you should stand up for it. If it's wrong, you should stand against it. It's not difficult to figure out. It's not. We have to stand up. We have to educate people. Even the people that are on the other side, the only reason that I can understand that they're on the other side is they just don't know the truth. So I've talked to so many people. They come up, oh yeah, them buddies, they could get blah, 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 and the Hammonds, and I take the time. Wait a minute, I was there. I know. I went and I shook Hammond Bundy's hand, and I looked him in the eye myself. I don't let somebody else make up my mind. I shook LaVoy's hand. I've hugged him and I've hugged his wife. I went out to the refuge, I sat there, he came over and he sat down at a coffee table and I was sitting on the couch and he thanked me for what I'd done. And I looked up right behind him, and I'll never forget this image. There was a flag on the wall. Big flag, United States of America flag. And right over his shoulder, in beautiful handwriting, never, and we can never, ever forget LaVoy Finicum. Thank you. You get back, BJ. This is my question.
What can we do to bring pressure on the Harney County DA to seat a grand jury so that they can review what happened out there on 395?
Okay, the question was, what can we do to inspire the Harney County government to relook at what happened out there on 395? Is that correct?
Yeah, particularly get a grand jury.
To get a grand jury, a common law grand jury would be the thing to get out there. I think right now we have to wait and find out what actually happens with the wrongful death thing and then go from there. But you have to communicate. Call the courthouse. Let your feelings be known. Write letters to your senators, your congressmen. Being quiet's not going to do it. You bet. Shawna wants to help me because I need help.
There's a couple things. Number one, the Hammonds had a $1.3 million fee. They took a plea deal that gave them the $400,000, so they had to also make the deal with giving them the land if they couldn't come up with the $400,000 by the end of December. We've learned, people, never take a plea. That's how the government wins 98% of the time. Grand juries can come from your county. I filed a lawsuit in Harney County to go to prove that the land belonged to the people. We had a problem, because if you go against the government, they have a clause in there that states that anybody that files against the federal government, that lawsuit is remanded back to the federal courts. I said, I don't want to go to the federal judge who made the declaration that it was their land, and why would I let her decide if they own it or not? She already made a declaration, we can't go there. So we have to pull together, and I summoned a common law grand jury. And you can do that in your own county. That needs to be in every county. And it can be called forth by the county clerk, and it can be called forth by a grand jury administrator. That's why I asked you to go to that website called We the People CommonLawGrandJury.com. That's really important. Look at the charges that are being charged against these people who have committed the crimes. You will find those people in there. You will decide who let me ask you this question. Who is supposed to be the jury? People of who? Your peers, right? Were our peers in Portland, Oregon? Are there any ranchers in Portland? That's where almost every single one of our jurors came from. Because it's controlled by the Queen, or the King, but the Queen at this moment. And so we have to change the narrative. And the way I put this is, and because my dad was a coach and I was a coach for a lot of years, let me explain this. We're playing on a football field, and they own the football field. They own the referees, and they own the football. Are we going to win? Well, let's get off the football field and put it back in our football field of we the people. Go do your research. We have to have you. We got to stand, and we have to get the peers of the victims. That's what the grand jury should be. Okay?
Thank you.
The petition that's circulating around to free the Hammonds, to get the Hammonds pardoned from President Trump, that's just not our everyday change.org petition. That petition is actually being hand-delivered. So please spread the word. Please don't, I know people get in their minds, oh, it's just another petition. It's not going to go anywhere. It's just an internet petition. This one's not. These signatures matter. These are going to be hand-delivered to Washington, D.C. So please spread the word on that. And if you haven't signed it, go ahead and sign it.
Okay, I'm the secretary on everything. Let me show you this. Okay, I actually have the resolution for that because we worked with Jennifer Fielding. She's a senator out of Montana. And Ryan Bundy and I worked with her for a little while, well, we put for a few days. Anyway, let me tell you, let me read the resolution, and then you'll understand the petition that we want you to sign. It's called a resolution supporting justice for Western ranchers. Whereas the truth about what the federal government has done to Western ranchers and the people who have risked their lives to support them must be told, and justice must be done. Whereas an uprising occurred in eastern Oregon after federal agencies sentenced father and son ranchers, Dwight and Stephen Hammond of Burns, Oregon, to 5 years in prison for the crime of utilizing common range management fires that spread slightly off of their own land and onto a small portion of adjacent public land. Whereas the federal charges brought against the Hammonds were extraordinarily severe, especially in the light of the fact that the federal land managers have, on numerous occasions, accidentally and at times purposely, burned thousands of acres of public and private property, including people's homes, barns, and fences, without consequence to the agency or its employees, and without compensation to the landowners whose property they destroyed. Whereas the federal government's own witness testified that the autumn 2001 management fire Dwight and Stephen were convicted of igniting in their own land actually improved range conditions. Criminal trial transcript at 377. And that Bureau of Land Management committed no suppression resources to extinguish the fire. That is a criminal trial exhibit A-37. Whereas, curiously, the incredibly harsh charges against Dwight and Stephen Hammond were preceded by a period of time in which the Hammonds had been publicly critical of federal land managers' actions. Whereas the record shows that for decades, the BLM and U.S. Forest Fish and Wildlife Service deployed federal administrative powers to punitively regulate and prosecute the Hammond family in what now appear to be thinly veiled efforts to take and convert the Hammond Ranch to federal control. Whereas, for example, the Hammonds spent decades warding off federal land managers' attempts to block them from trailing their cattle to their lawfully held grazing lands by way of historic stock driveways that are verified in historical records. Whereas in 1994, the BLM and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service arrested Dwight Hammond for protecting access to his legally owned water rights, and the federal agencies still continue to fence out the Hammonds' access to their water, despite the fact that their vested water rights have been upheld in state courts. Whereas between 1994 and 2006, even though the Hammonds held federal grazing permits attached to their statutorily protected grazing preference and vested stock water rights, federal land managers stripped them of 3 BLM grazing permits and 1 Malheur National Wildlife Refuge grazing permit, thereby systematically gutting the size and economic viability of the Hammond Ranch. Whereas in the fall of 2001, after receiving BLM permission, Dwight and Stephen Hammond started to prescribe range management burn on their private land that spread to 137 acres of adjoining public land upon which the Hammonds owned grazing rights. However, Stephen reported it, the fire improved the range, and the BLM did not cite them for the fire. That is until 9 years later. Whereas in 2006, during a violent thunderstorm, lightning ignited a wildfire that seriously threatened to wipe out the Hammonds' winter feeding grounds and possibly even their barns and home. Whereas in a widely accepted firefighting practice, Stephen Hammond started a strategic emergency backfire on his family's private land, which successfully saved their winter grazing area, protected their home and barns, and potentially saved thousands of acres of public land from being engulfed in the 2006 wildfire. Whereas Stephen's 2006 emergency backfire burned as little as 1 acre of adjoining public land, for which the BLM pursued criminal charges in state court by District Attorney Tim Callahan, reviewed the facts and declined to press charges against the Hammonds. Whereas in 2010, before the statute of limitations ran out on the 2001 fire, the BLM brought the Hammonds into federal court, indicting them on numerous charges relating to both fires. Whereas the BLM avoided bringing charges under their own statutes, including the one which specifically provides an exception for crimes related to fires started by ranchers who own grazing allotments in certain circumstances. Namely, this section shall not apply in the case of a fire set by an allottee in the reasonable exercise of his property rights in the allotment. That's 18 U.S.C. 1855. Whereas, rather than citing Dwight and Stephen for a trespass burn, which is the standard citation under BLM land use statutes, federal prosecutors instead charged them as arsonists under the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996. The law enacted by Congress in response to Timothy McVeigh's horrendous bombing of a public building in Oklahoma City. Whereas eventually the federal government's claim that the Hammonds lit fires on public lands, endangered federal employees, and attempted to destroy government vehicles were unfounded. In fact, 10 of the 13 charges against the Hammonds were either dismissed or resulted in not guilty verdicts. Whereas the 1 count Dwight was convicted of relating solely to the 2001 prescribed burn, which improved the range and was ignited on his private land after his son Stephen had called the BLM dispatcher and received the okay to burn. Criminal trial transcript. Exhibit A3, jury verdict document, not 194. Whereas the 2 counts Stephen was convicted of relating solely to the 2001 range improvements fire and the 2006 emergency back burn, both of which the jury concluded had caused less than $1,000 in damage. Whereas the Hammonds were only convicted of practices they never denied, that is lighting 2 range management fires on their own land in accordance with standard techniques that caused essentially no harm and are common among ranchers, farmers, and public land managers in the area. Whereas Federal District Court Judge Michael Hogan declared it would be cruel and unusual punishment for this crime to give them the mandatory minimum of 5 years, such as required under the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996. Whereas the Federal District Court Judge issued a sentence of 1 year for Stephen and 90 days for Dwight, and he even allowed the men to serve staggered terms so they could keep the family ranch afloat. Whereas after finally succeeding in obtaining a conviction against the Hammonds, albeit minuscule, the U.S. government filed an outrageous $1.3 million claim for damages in a civil suit and offered in what amounts to extortion to drop all charges on the condition that the Hammonds sign over 2/3 of the ranch to the federal government. Whereas facing substantial threats from the U.S. government, perhaps the largest law firm in the world, the Hammonds agreed to a plea that would lower the fine from $1.3 million to $400,000 and give the federal government first right of refusal should the Hammonds ever be forced to sell the ranch. Whereas the Hammonds paid the fine and served out their sentences, but still the federal government pressed forward to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals demanding resentencing under the full force of the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act to lock Dwight and Stephen up for 5 years, the very sentence that Judge Hogan declined to apply, saying such a harsh punishment under the circumstances would shock the conscience. Whereas, in what many in the West and across the nation view as a manifest miscarriage of justice akin to double jeopardy, Dwight and Stephen Hammond were resentenced to 5 years in federal prison, both at the same time, making it impossible for them to help keep the family ranch going. Whereas, just before Dwight and Stephen Hammond were to report back to prison for the 5-year terms, a large but entirely peaceful public march took place in their hometown of Burns, Oregon. However, the Hammonds, under threat from federal agencies, did not participate in it. Whereas at the conclusion of the peaceful march, numerous Americans risked their lives in a symbolic occupation of the desolate Malheur Wildlife Refuge about 30 miles away to draw a national spotlight to the plight of the Hammonds and to request a redress of this and many other grievances concerning the federal government's crushing control of half of all the land in Western America. Whereas the Malheur protesters never pointed a firearm at anyone and were not convicted of firearms violations, but federal agents and Oregon State Police shot at several of them with deadly force as some of the protesters peacefully traveled to a public meeting, thereby wounding Wyatt Ryan Bundy in the shoulder while he sat unarmed in the vehicle and killing LaVoy Finicum after he exited the vehicle with hands up. Whereas in the state of Nevada, a preceding case of conflict between the BLM and Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy had culminated in a tense standoff between BLM law enforcement agents and hundreds of conscientious Americans who had come to Bundy's aid after government snipers were positioned around his home. Other agents began brutally executing his cattle, and bystanders were roughed up for attempting to film him. Whereas the federal government pressed charges against Bundy, his sons, and others for their respective roles in the Nevada standoff as well as the Malheur protest, and held them in prison without a conviction for nearly 2 years. However, the Bundys and most of their protesters were eventually found not guilty or otherwise exonerated on all counts. Whereas a 17-page whistleblowing letter released by the federal government led investigators, Special Agent Larry Wooten, in the Nevada standoff case, cited multiple cover-ups within the federal agencies and a widespread pattern of bad judgment, lack of discipline, incredible bias, unprofessionalism, and misconduct, as well as likely policy, ethical, and legal violations among senior and supervisory staff. Whereas Agent Wooten's whistleblower letter disclosed that a senior BLM law enforcement supervisor had bragged of a kill list, and that the BLM Law Enforcement Operations Center had photographs of Bundy and a supporter displayed on the command center bulletin board with a prominent X marks drawn through the head and body of Cliven Bundy and the supporter. Whereas on December the 20th, 2017, U.S. District Judge Gloria Navarro declared a mistrial in the Nevada standoff case, citing a universal sense of injustice and flagrant prosecutorial misconduct after discovering that the BLM and Department of Justice had withheld massive amounts of evidence that contradicted the federal government's version of events and could have exonerated all of the accused. Whereas among key evidence hidden by the BLM and the Department of Justice was an FBI assessment concluding that the Bundys were not violent, that the BLM was trying to provoke conflict, and other government records proving that before Cliven Bundy summoned neighbors, friends, the county sheriff, the governor, legislators, and citizen militia to come to his defense, the BLM had indeed placed deadly sniper teams around his home, while other agents began covertly and brutally executing his cattle. Whereas on January 10, 2018, the chairman of the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Natural Resources and the chairman of the Congressional Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee issued a letter concerning numerous and serious reports of misconduct and possible criminal activity within the Bureau of Land Management related to the Bundy case and likely others. Whereas the aforementioned congressional chairman's letter states, the failure in the Bundy case and previous cases displays serious misconduct by the BLM law enforcement officials and strongly suggests that they are systematic issues within BLM's law enforcement operations. Whereas we have yet to know the full degree to which federal administrative, prosecutorial, and enforcement powers have been weaponized in a concert effort to federal land management and environmental agencies aided by federal courts and the Department of Justice to extort exorbitant fines from law-abiding people, deprive them of their property, denigrate their character, block lawful and beneficial use of public lands, and destroy the lives and livelihoods of countless hardworking Americans. Whereas for justice and the rule of law to mean anything in this country, it must be applied equally to everyone, not selectively against private citizens, while in favor of federal employees, and certainly not for ulterior motives such as those exposed in the prosecution of the Hammonds, the Bundys, and others. Whereas in 2016, the American people elected Donald J. Trump, a bold, dedicated, and decisive president of the United States, who proclaimed that he would transfer power from Washington, D.C. to the people and drain the swamp or corrupt, self-serving, and unjust elements within the federal government. Therefore, be it resolved, we the people respectfully request the President and the Congress of the United States of America to do all in their respective constitutional powers to immediately effect the following. 1. Grant full pardon to ranchers Dwight and Stephen Hammond. 2. Extinguish the federal government's first right of refusal on the Hammond Ranch. 3. Amend the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996 to never again be improperly applied to people who use backfire to protect their property. 4. Recognize and honor the Hammond and Bundy Ranch grazing and water rights. 5. Withdraw all charges and or grant a full pardon to all the Malheur and Bunkerville protesters and return all their lawfully owned property to them. 6. Ensure that all government conduct related to the Hammonds, Bundys, Malheur, and Bunkerville protesters, including conduct of the federal courts, be fully investigated so that the malicious misconduct, deliberate bias, and criminal acts committed by government employees against the people are exposed, halted, and prosecuted. Be it further resolved that we, the people, commend President Donald J. Trump and stand with him in constitutional exertions to drain the proverbial swamp of self-serving power and corruption, restore the proper boundaries of federalism, return power to the states, and free our lands from onerous federal bureaucracy so that the public and private lands within each state can finally be managed with local care, knowledge, and accountability and justice.
The Patriots would like to know. What do you got to say? You came to visit us? And you came to celebrate the memory of LaVoy? We would like to know what you have to say. Yep. Hi, Peter. So we would all like to give you a hand for coming today. Okay? And I would like to know if there is anything that you would like to address to these patriots about your opinion on public lands.
Go ahead, speak. Well, thank you for welcoming me. Thank you for welcoming me.
Well, thank you for coming and gracing us with your presence.
I want to show you a picture. You probably can't see it from where you're standing, but it's a picture of me and LaVoy, and I just wanted to mention that I did go down to the refuge and I listened to what LaVoy said, and I took it to heart. And there's some people, there's no secret here. I see things a little differently, and I told LaVoy that, and he respected that, and I respected him. And there are people who see things differently who have said bad things about LaVoy. I've never said anything personally bad about LaVoy. I respect him greatly as a man. Thank you. We can have differences and still respect each other and acknowledge that we're all Americans and we all want the best things for this country. Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry.
I'd also like to, Chris shared something with us when he was at our house last night. And so I just want to clarify, just in case anybody's got any misunderstandings out there. When they had the second trial, he was not given an opportunity to really say very much. And what happened is he was actually called out on public media yesterday after he spoke at Montana last week. Tell him what was said about that.
Oh, it came out that I was one of the people that put the Hammonds in prison. As the Harney County Fire Chief, I was subpoenaed to testify in their court case in Pendleton. I went up there and I sat there and they asked me questions and I answered them truthfully, but they wouldn't let me elaborate on anything I had to say. It was yes or no. I wasn't able to say anything in behalf of them. When I tried, I was told to be, just answer it yes or no. It's very, very similar. I mean, there are some parallels from their trial to the Bundy trial in Portland to the Bundy trial in Nevada. The prosecutors ran the show. The defense had no power. That's not the way our justice system is set up. People should know the truth. They're there to, the jury is there to decide on the facts. And when the court system does not let the facts out, how can they make a good decision? You have to be able to hear all of the facts to make up your own mind. And I think that's very, very important. That there's some, it just keeps happening over and over and over. And President Trump, if you ever see this, please, sir, we do need your help to clean this mess up. We do need your help. And we are asking you humbly to please help us to save this great country. If we don't do something about this, think about what rights are your children going to have? What rights are your grandchildren and great-grandchildren going to have? How many people have ever been able to just wander through the mountains or out in the prairies and just enjoy our public land? And now the roads are all shut down and you get in trouble if you go out there. They're taking our rights. We want our rights back. We the people want this to be the country that it was set up to be.
But Chris is right. And if any of you have ever been in a jury trial, you know this, or if you have watched one, and you know that questions are very carefully crafted so that they're going to get the answers that they want. So he didn't have the opportunity to defend the Hammonds whatsoever. And so I felt really bad when I heard that he got attacked by somebody on social media because they were accusing him of sending the Hammonds to prison, which couldn't be further from the truth. So that's kind of a challenge we all have. Social media is just great until it's not. And probably everybody here at one time or another has been called out by somebody because, oh, you did such and such. Because people behind the keyboard are anonymous, and so they can say things that they wouldn't walk up to us and say to our face. So I challenge you that if somebody starts bad-mouthing another patriot on Facebook, that you just go, where's the proof? Is that true? Rather than spread the rumor. I know of 2 cases this week where people got crucified for something that was not even their fault, didn't know anything about it, but somebody bought into a lie. So I just challenge you to really think about that before you do that. How many people have a cell phone and know how to operate it? Okay, are these like all smartphones? Okay, I don't know how to do a smartphone. I have a dumb phone. So I'm going to tell you right now, for me, and I think for everyone about here, learning how to read the Constitution is a whole lot easier than a smartphone. Somebody just gave me that nugget.
I'll second that, Cheryl. I got a phone I can't work.
He's got a phone he can't work. About what LaVoy was teaching, unfortunately we don't have like a whiteboard or anything for her to do the illustrations, and we may not get through the whole thing, but she just kind of wants to tell you what LaVoy was going around and teaching the ranchers about not signing the contracts with the federal government, about how this was their land, they didn't have to sign these contracts. And so she's just going to give us a short little synopsis of what that talk was.
I don't know if you want to spend time listening, but issue is, we all know about the Constitution. The Constitution was based upon natural law. Natural law is what happens in nature. Nobody has to tell the birds that they got to fly south when the snow comes. Nobody tells the cows that they got to trail in lines. Nobody says that male and female make babies. That just happens. It happens in nature. That's what natural law is. So natural law is if we have God-given rights. The government can't give them to us because the government would take them away. Nobody gives them to us. They're natural because God gave them to us. Which gives us common sense is what I call it. If we were standing in line, because moral people stand in line, some people don't. If, let's say it's Black Friday and there's an iPhone store. And all of you, well, maybe some of you have been to Black Fridays and everybody crowds in. But the first one there gets in line and then 10 people jump in behind him and now there's a big line going on and some of them come in at midnight or sooner. How do we know that the very first person in line, let's say that they're going to get 10 free iPhones. The first 10 people in line get iPhones because that's their marketing. So how do you know that the very first person in line gets the first iPhone? Because he's the first one there, right? First in line, first in time. That's how it works. So when you have a right, you have to claim it. There's 3 ways to get your rights, and some of you have heard this over and over. There's 3 ways. It's called claim, use, defend. You have no rights if you don't do those 3 things, and it has to be all 3 things. So the first right is claim it. So now he's taken his position. Let's say we're standing like the 4th person in line. Now we've been here since early morning, and it's getting like 6 o'clock in the morning. We're freezing. And we got to go to the bathroom, and no, I got to get out of line. What happens if you step out of a line? Who knows? You lose your place. It's called use it or lose it. Now, there is an exception. Sometimes you can talk to the person behind you and say, could you hold my place in line for a minute? And they will, probably, if it's just for a short minute. If you went to the bathroom and right back. Well, what happens if you decide to grab some breakfast and a drink and you're gone a long time? When you come back, do you think the spot's going to still be there? Probably not. So it's use it. So there you have to claim it, you've used it, and now you have to defend that spot. Now, if you defend that spot, how important is it that you need that iPhone? Let's say, well, I don't know which one of you. Let's say Chris Wiles comes and jumps in front of me and says, and he takes my spot. And I don't know what to do, so I'm going to go, I have to defend it. Number 1, because if I don't defend it, not only did I give up my spot, but the guy number 10's lost his spot. And he's probably mad. So you know what I do? I would go to 10 and say, help me get him out of here because he's bigger than me, right? But first of all, I would say, hey, buddy, the back of the line's right back there.
Yes, ma'am.
And a moral person would go to the back of the line. But if he's not, and he just steps in front of you, then, and I can't move him because physically I couldn't move him, that's when I would go to the number 10 spot, and I would talk to the person behind me and the person in front of me until we've made a coalition of those 10 people who already knew that they were going to have the iPhones. And what do we call that? Once we all go together, do you think he's going to fight 10 of us? Probably not. He'll probably leave. But what is that called? Does anybody understand what that is? That's called government. Government is the people closest to the people who know you and you help defend you, right? That's what government is. That's why we have to stand together. If you want to get rid of a right, what are the 4 ways you get rid of a right? To dispose of. How do you dispose of a right?
Waive it.
You what?
You waive it.
Yeah, okay, you waive it. Well, how do you waive it? Well, if you have a right, let's say I'm standing in this spot, and somebody comes and says, I'll give you $100 for that iPhone.
I'm in your spot.
I would say, I'll sell you my spot for 50 bucks. Because I need 50 bucks more than I need the phone.
25.
Let's make a deal. We can do that. You can sell it. Or you can just, she just bartered with me, didn't she? There's another one you can barter. Maybe she's got a coupon for a television and I'll switch it. Or a redneck. For an iPhone, I think not. So you can sell, you can barter. Now I can just step away and abandon it. When you said waive it,
Defend it.
I can defend it, right? Well, I already have it, but then how do we dispose of it? How do we get rid of it? Okay, we've defended it because we want it, and now we can, but it's our right because we already have it, and and it's valuable, right? That's what it's our value. It's valuable. It's valuable to someone else, but we can gift it to someone. What happens if it's not an iPhone and it's a church picnic? And somebody comes in and they butt in front of you and they have a whole bunch of kids behind them. Now, how are you going to defend it? Do you care? Does it matter what the product is that you're defending? What your right is? It depends on what that product X is. If it's something like that, there's plenty of food. Who cares if somebody steps in and brings their children? Then we probably act a little bit more Christian, we step back, we let them take the family in, and we give it to them, right? We could gift it to them anyway. That's your choice, but that's your right. Well, then that's where it comes to our land rights. Back when the United States was first formed in 1776, we signed a peace treaty. There were 13 independent nations. And they signed a peace treaty. Does anybody know what that was called? The Treaty of Paris, because it was signed in Paris first. It actually didn't get the last signature until 1780. But that was when they had 14 signatures. Who was the 14th signature on that treaty?
Great Britain.
Okay, Great Britain, England. Because they made a treaty stating that yes, you've won your independence from them, and that is your land. How much property did Great Britain retain inside of each of those states, in those nations? Zero. Absolutely right. They retained none. So this is what the premises we're trying to teach that you have constitutional rights. And when somebody comes in your county or your state, how much land should the federal government be holding in your state? None, because we're supposed to be the same as the original and the same footprint as original 13 colonies, but but they're nations. They're independent nations. They're sovereign. Because they are sovereign, they have borders. We elect people to protect us. I like to say that when they expanded that land and so we had the Northwest Treaty territories, that we obtained the Northwest territories. They had to dispose of them because that's what we set up the Constitution to do. Let's go back to the Constitution. The reason that we had these 13 independent nations, they were a little bit worried now because Great Britain is the biggest army and the biggest navy in the world, and they had a huge military. How could each one of these independent nations protect themselves if they didn't, if they were by themselves? They were afraid that England would come back and attack one of their nations. So they united together and hired someone to protect them. And that's when they created the federal government. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. But they were not allowed. They were only allowed certain rights. And that was your 10-mile square. And if they wanted to have any land in any of those states, they could purchase it by consent to the legislature, by the state in which they wanted to purchase it, and it had to be used for certain things, and it derives that. What are they? Stockyards, dockyards, forts, magazines, and other needful buildings, correct? All for military purposes, because their whole purpose was to protect these nations. When they expanded to the Northwest Territories, now they said, okay, what are we going to do? We've got to dispose of, because in Article 1, Section 8, 6, 4, and 2 tells us we have to dispose. 4, 3, and 2, sorry. It says we must dispose of those lands. The federal government can't own them. So how did they dispose? Did they sell it? Did they trade it? Did they abandon it? How did they do that? First of all, they sold the first part of it because they had to pay off their war debts. And then they said, everybody go out and homestead, right? If you were out homestead claiming your rights, the people went out and they did what? They staked their property corners. This is my land, okay? And they created record of those properties. At the beginning, they didn't. And so but they would go out and they'd put sticks in the ground or whatever. This is my property. They'd build them a house. And they lived there and they were happy. Until one day, they leave the house. They got to go out hunting. They got to go fishing, and they got to gather wood. And while they're gone, a bigger family moves in, or a bunch of men. Somebody moves into your house. When you come back, they're much stronger than you, and you can't move them out. So how do you reclaim your property back? You lost it. They stole it. So now, they got smart, and they said, next time I'm going to build a house, and I'm going to get my son to build a house next door, and I'm going to get my brother to build a house next door, and I'm going to get my father, and we're all going to have a little village of our own. So anytime I have to leave, they can watch my property or I can watch theirs. What do we call that today? A neighborhood watch. Don't we have neighborhood watch? Then we got a few little villages and a few little towns and a city in that same area. And in that area, when they have those properties, they decided to put boundaries around it, because we have some resources here in that boundary, and we have some trees, and we might have a lake. And what happens when we have those resources? The entrepreneurs rise to the top, don't they? Oh, somebody's got a brilliant idea. I'm going to make a boat, and I'm going to go out on that lake, and I'm going to fish, and I need you to help me because I want you to fish, and I want you to haul water, and that's how it works. So everybody is now out creating jobs or working, and they're still leaving the house. But somebody's got to watch our stuff while everybody's gone. And the stuff is going to be protected by the biggest, strongest, most honest man we know, and we elect him, and we say, we will give you part of our wages to protect us in these borders. Who is that person? The sheriff. The sheriff, the closest to the people. Somebody we know, somebody we trust, somebody we believe in. And then I like to compare that to a shepherd's field. If we all own sheep, and we send somebody out to watch the sheep, what happens if a lot of wolves come in? Now, he might be a really strong man, and he could kill one wolf, and he might kill two. But when a pack of wolves come, what does he do? What does he do? He calls wolf. Have you ever heard the fable about wolf and the shepherd, right? He calls wolf. And who comes to help him? Every man, woman, and child in that whole vicinity, because they got to get rid of the wolves, right? That is your militia. Every man, woman, and child. That is a right. That is not, nobody has to tell you. You know that if you're going to save the sheep, you got to join together. That's the power of the people. Now we do that. We have a few counties, and we put boundaries around it. And then we hire somebody to protect the borders. And who would that be? We elect somebody, because now we got a number of counties, and we put borders around it, and we have an independent nation. Who is that? Who do we elect to protect our borders? The governor. Okay? The governor. Every single state has a governor that we elect to protect the borders, so that anybody coming from the outside can't come in and steal your resources. The same thing in the county. Do we allow the sheriff to come into our county because he's a sheriff to just start taking all the timber himself, or all the water, or the fish, or... No, we don't. We know him. He's an honest man. He's supposed to be protecting us. He's not going to steal our resources. So why, when we get into a state and we elect a governor to protect our borders, would he allow anybody else to come into our state to steal our resources and our water and our fish? And why would he do that? Because we elected him to protect the borders. Now we have states united, and in those states we have hired somebody we called the federal government, correct? That federal government works like the sheriff. They're hired to protect the borders. And we don't allow other things that's spelled out in the Constitution, that is to protect anything coming in or out of those states that are united. That's what we hire them for. Did we ever at any time say you can come into our state and steal our property and our minerals and our resources? Never. And they don't own any property, because the Constitution tells us they can't. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, you cannot own any land within these borders. It is the people who live there who own that land. It is public land for the people inside those borders. Why do you think we have county recorders? Because we record those deeds. Those deeds say, this is my property, it is staked out, whether I purchased it, whether I traded for it, whether I stole it, I don't care, but it has to be recorded, because now the other neighbor can't encroach upon you and move you out. So you have to claim your rights, you have to use the rights, and you have to defend your rights. And how far will you go to defend yourself for your property? Why is it important? The Constitution tells us three things: are life, liberty, and property. And now with that, they changed it to pursuit of happiness. Why? It was property. What does property mean to you? It means life. Because you see, if you own property, it's land. You can grow your own food. All of our riches and resources come from the land. You can grow your own food. You can build your own house. You can have your own clothes. Every single thing that we have comes from the earth. And that's why land. We can take care of ourselves if we own land. We can grow our gardens. We don't have to go to a store. That's part of bartering. That's part of trading, and our life changes as we can do that. But you can survive if you own property. That is so important. So the founding fathers said, okay, if property was very important, you have a right to defend that property against anybody. You also have a right to defend your life and your family's life. And you have a right to defend your liberty. Is that right? Yes. You can't put me in jail. You can't do these things. I have a right to defend myself. And how far does the Constitution, how far can you go to defend those three things? We have a Second Amendment, right? To bloodshed. You can actually defend those things, and that is upheld by the Constitution because no other country allowed that. We have a right to bear arms to protect ourselves. It doesn't say what kind of arms. It doesn't say, and what is the government doing to us? Disarming everything that we have, it doesn't say what kind of, there is no limit. It says shall not be infringed. So why are we allowing them to trample upon those rights and take away our rights that are not natural, God-given rights in the Constitution? This was the virus that we were being accused of, to teach the people that they have rights. People, you have rights. They put a gag order on me. They did not want us to tell the truth. They did not want us to teach the people. But we have to teach the people, because somewhere along the line they've dumbed us down. We don't get taught by the Constitution. Our school education system has been taken over. We don't know that we have rights, and if we don't stand together we will fall apart. Anyway, that was the presentation.